Man, I love mechs, so I'm giving myself 7 days to learn how to draw them. But speaking of mechs, do you want to know the one thing that could possibly be more manly than, joining the gym or joining the army? That's right. Raising a... Wrong. Guys, believe it or not, it's actually drawing anime girls. And you want to know the one thing cooler than that? It's drawing them without... No guys, come on, get with the program. It's drawing them with cool sci-fi mechanical parts. And before you close the video, hear me out. Because I spent the last 7 days trying to combine the two things that inspire my art the most, being anime girls and mechs. And the results kinda started off as a disaster, but I persevered, and by the end they were much less of a disaster, and I ended up learning something that I will be holding on for the rest of my artistic journey. So let's get into it and see how that all went down. Okay, here's my situation. I love anime girls, drawing anime girls that is, and I recently did a challenge to see how good I can get at drawing anime girls, and I made some pretty decent progress in the time, which you can check out on my channel. And then the question as old as time hit me. Do I keep drawing anime girls or do I learn mechs? Keep drawing anime girls or learn how to draw mechs? Draw anime girls or mechs? I ping-ponged between that for quite a while, but then it came to me. Instead of picking one or the other, why don't I try to combine them? So that's exactly what I did here, as you can see. Well, not quite like that. I was thinking more something like that. Yep, that's better. Mechs have always been this thing I want to get good at, and I would always run into roadblocks when I try to create my own, such as when I draw the mechs, they wouldn't look half bad, but when it came to drawing those same components at different angles, everything would come crumbling down. Yet, I was determined to find a way to be able to combine these two passions instead of just forcing myself to pick one and throwing the other one in the trash. So I gave myself 7 days to figure out just that. And I need to be upfront with you right now. I didn't really have a plan going into this. I thought this was gonna be easy work, like it can't be that hard to draw mech stuff, but it goes way deeper than I originally thought. And at least 2 of these days I genuinely considered quitting and just drawing a schoolgirl with a huge mechanical sword and calling it a mech. But without further ado, day 1. As the overly confident mech newbie, I decided, you know what, instead of starting from the ground up, I'm going to do the complete opposite, making me to make the very bold decision to try to design a whole character to see where I was at, which ultimately led to frustration. I even designed a whole mood board, and she was going to be this plague doctor medic situation with mechanical limbs, a crossbow, the whole thing. Really cool concept on paper, but when it came to executing the mechanical parts, I think it looked dumb. So I decided to take a step back. Well, every step back. And I just started doodling some anime faces with mechanical parts integrated into them to see if I had any hope of design skills at all. And even though this was only day 1, I knew this week was going to fly by, and if I kept making sketches that looked like this, then no progress would ever be made, as these mechanical parts have no logic to them. They were just shapes I slapped on a face and hoped for the best, which made me realize that if I actually wanted to get good by the end of this, I was going to have to tackle basically everything, whether that was the spatial reasoning, the mechanical logic, the shape language, or the way they move. Which leads us to day 2. For day 2, I wanted to see what a more detailed headgear piece would actually look like at my current skill, because I genuinely couldn't stop thinking about how rough they looked the day before. But the second I had to draw that same piece on the opposite side of her head from a different angle, my brain completely just shut down. I would try erasing and redrawing the lines, but it just wouldn't look right. And that's when I hit that brick wall I was getting all too familiar with. But the thing that really hurt and felt like a stab at my beginner artist heart was the moment I had to face reality. I couldn't for the life of me draw a form on the other side of her head, so I just copied and pasted the original piece. The thing that hurt the most was that this wasn't even a mech problem that I could just blame on my inexperience. This was a fundamentals problem. I couldn't rotate a basic object in space, so me and the trash can had our 1-day anniversary, and in the drawing went. 2 days in, and I basically had nothing to show for it, besides a growing suspicion that I had no clue what I was doing. So I went back to something I hadn't touched since the day I started taking art seriously: boxes. I spent the rest of day 2 doing nothing but rotating basic volumes in space, and what this day reinforced to me was that when trying to rotate something, I couldn't just Jung-Ji it. What I actually had to do was slow down, draw the full box first, place the shape inside, and use the box as scaffolding to figure out where every edge and surface would go before I drew a single detail on top. This habit I was building of trying to jump straight into the flashy stuff and skipping the fundamentals reminded me of this quote: "The thing you keep skipping is always the exact thing you need to do first. Not because it's the most exciting thing, it's usually the least exciting thing." So tomorrow I was done avoiding things. Tomorrow we were going to go into actual mechanical logic and how mechs work, specifically the 3 joints that make them move. As you guys probably know, mechs tend to have a function, meaning they operate, whether that's picking something up or pushing something or whatever that is. But they all seem to move in various ways, which I proudly showcase what happens if you don't keep that in mind. While in shows like Evangelion, the mechs don't just slide across the screen like a 2D sticker, but how do you express that on a flat 2D screen? That's where mech joints come in. So day 3 was entirely about joints, specifically 3 of them: the hinge joint, the pivot joint, and the ball and socket joint. There are more, and I'm sure you can go much deeper than this, but that's for future me to think about. Firstly, the hinge joint. This one rotates on a single axis, but instead of spinning, it folds. Your elbow is a hinge joint, your knee is a hinge joint, and from what I can tell, most mech legs and arms are built around these hinges as their primary movement. And here you can just see me testing some variations. Next, we have the pivot joint. I forgot to start the time lapse for a bit, so that's why the first 2 weren't fully drawn out, but this one is also single axis. Think of a turret that can spin left and spin right, but it can't tilt up and down on its own. From what I have learned so far, this seems to be great for anything that needs controlled one-directional movement, such as the wrist or the waist. Thirdly, we have the ball and socket joint. This one is the most complex. It's the most expressive, and yet it's the one I struggled with the most. It has full range of motion in every direction: shoulders, hips, anywhere that the mech needs to be dynamic and fluid. Yet representing that on a 2D page was definitely the hardest for me out of the 3 joints. One thing I learned while watching videos about mechs that I hadn't even considered before was the joint you choose is a design decision, not just a mechanical one. A mech with all hinge joints reads as rigid and possibly stiff, whereas a mech with lots of ball and socket joints reads as more organic and dynamic. You could also break these rules quite a bit, and I'm sure people do, but because I'm a newbie, I'll be sticking closer to the basics for now. And at the end of the day 3, I felt like I had a decent understanding of the basics of how they move, but there was something I still couldn't answer, and it was nagging me all day. I could sorta draw out a pivot joint, but if you asked me to design one that looked like it belonged to an actual machine rather than a diagram in a textbook, I currently had nothing. So day 4, I was gonna have to change that, unless I wanted my final illustration to still look like a 2D sticker. I spent most of today just studying construction vehicles and factory machines because they're absolutely packed with moving parts and various joints. And while I was studying them, I noticed something that honestly made mech design feel less intimidating. Even though machines look highly complex at first glance, when I actually break them down, most of the individual parts are simple cubes, rectangles, cylinders, and spheres. And those main primitive forms are what I mainly try to capture on these studies. And realizing that led to one of the most valuable things I learned through this whole video. So I need to start with the primitive forms, and then later on I can break them down and make them more complex. But at the same time, the pressure was definitely starting to build as I only had a couple days left before the final illustration. And if you've noticed so far, everything I had done up in this point was just line work. I hadn't even touched color yet, which was one of many things I still feel like I need to learn before the final. This next day ended up being extremely important because it taught me something that I picked up on subconsciously, but I never really understood. Drawing mechs isn't just about being able to draw forms or get the perspective right. There's something that all good mech art shares, and when it's not there, they usually fall apart. It's the actual design and shape language behind the mechs, which gives them their true character. When I show you these 2 mechs, you probably instantly knew which one is friendly and which one is not so friendly. So I started off with blocky forms, which gives them a more tanky and sturdy look, and I found these to be the easiest because cube adjacent forms are reasonably straightforward, and I tested some triangular forms after, which does the opposite as the blocky forms and makes them look fast and agile. Then I moved to rounded forms, which gives them a more friendly and supportive look, and lastly I attempted long forms, which is supposedly meant to make them look elegant and powerful, but mine definitely did not capture that. While he wasn't elegant, he was long. And speaking of long, I definitely did not have a long time until the final illustration, as I only had 1 full day left, and I didn't only not know what rendering style I was going to use, I still had mechs turning out like this. And with only one day left, my faith in this whole process was starting to slip away. But I had no time for such worries and sulking, so here we were on day number 6. Today was all about rendering, which was still something I was pretty shaky at. In fact, the last video I made was really my first serious attempt at rendering, and if you want to see my digital art journey up to this point, I'd love if you would check it out. And right before I get back into the video, thank you so much for getting this far, and any suggestions and tips would mean a lot to me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. So my main goal today was to study and break down an art style from this Pinterest illustration that I loved. The colors had this minimalist, angelic feeling to them, and the gold accents just looked incredible, so I wanted to try it out for myself. Usually I stick to only cell shading, but for this study I experimented with mixing a more painterly approach with my usual cell shaded style, and the results were definitely far from what I was used to, and I didn't understand why mine looked so muddy but the reference wasn't. Towards the end of the day, I noticed a reoccurring problem. My drawings still felt stiff, and they didn't look like they could actually move and function, and it was severely hurting their immersion. So I wrapped up today with a quick refresh on joints, trying to just drill into my head how important clear mechanical articulation would be for the final. But with every study up to this point having been built towards one thing, the day 7 final illustration, I was definitely nervous. But for the first time during this whole challenge, I felt confident. Maybe all the practice and growth might actually be enough to pull it off. So without further ado, day number 7. I'm going for an anime girl with mech armor fully integrated in her design. Not just a suit she's wearing, but a design where the mechanical features and human are one. This piece was my first full original character, and I wanted to go all out like something that could exist in Evangelion. The first thing I did was lock in the pose and anatomy before I touched a single mechanical piece, and I wanted the mechanical features to almost appear as prosthetics. I aimed to make the character look like she was jumping in space, almost mid backflip, and for all the mechanics, I went into a round beveled shape language as I wanted her to appear supportive and friendly, which I aimed to reflect in her expression. Here you can see me continue to carve and reshape her anatomy and morphing them into the mechanical limbs. And to finish off the line work, I drew some contour lines to further establish the mechanical forms. Once the line work was complete, it was time to gray out her silhouette and apply the base colors. And I decided to go with that color scheme from day 6, and I was already over 6 hours in, and man, it felt good to get the base colors down. As the line art was a roller coaster of emotions to get the level that I was happy with, so it felt nice to lock it in, but the pressure of still having to render was still in full swing, and it was going to make or break the final illustration. I went with the full cell shading look as that was definitely my comfort zone, but I do want to try different styles eventually in a future video, so let me know if you guys have any ideas. I'm all ears. And I hope you enjoyed the final segment of this illustration and stick to the end to hear my number 1 takeaway from this whole 7-day adventure, as I believe anyone with any creative interest, whether it's art or not, can take away something I learned from this and benefit their own art journey. So here it was, challenge complete. The 7 days were officially at its end. It was far from perfect, and I can spot a couple areas that I wish I spent more time on, like her expression, her hands, and I didn't think I really captured the silver mechanical polish that I tried to. So I'll have to keep working on that. But for my first original character and real shot at Mecha illustration, I impressed myself, and I was proud. There are things I would definitely do differently if I started this week-long challenge over, but nonetheless, I had so much fun. Now, unfortunately, none of us can go back in time, but I did take something away from all of this, and here's the part I want you to take away too. At the start of the week, my instinct when I looked at the design of Anime Mecha was to rush and copy a bunch of references and try to mix them all together in a blender, but that began to change as the days went on. By the end, I had a foundation. I could ask myself questions such as what joint should I use here, what shape language to use, and what difference does it make, and how can I create movement on a 2D page? Those questions exist in my head now in a way that they didn't before. Those questions used to just be, how do I copy this reference, and wondering why it looked bad every time. I want to push my digital illustration and mecha design skills way farther than I got, as I feel like I just scratched the surface. While mechanical skills can take years to master, something that absolutely can transform in 7 days is how you think about a problem. So if you're sitting on something you keep avoiding because you don't feel ready, for you maybe it's an art style, a subject, or a combination that feels too ambitious right now, don't wait until you try to figure everything out. Start now and the answers will follow. Alright, I'll catch you in the next one. Have an amazing day and peace.